All right, we got a great episode coming up for you today, which is brought to you by Truebill, my friends. You can go ahead and get that new app, which will help you save money by identifying and stopping the payments and subscriptions to the apps that you do not need, and can even, by the way, negotiate a better deal on your behalf for those you want to keep. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. Friends, it's Mailbag Friday. We are talking about Steve Nash being the right coach for Brooklyn, diving in on some roster rotations. I'm going to give you some rookie ideas and even recommend a drastic changing to the starting five, Doug.
Oh, I think this is the episode where Adam and I might have disagreed the most. You're usually in lockstep in a lot of stuff, but we had a couple disagree. It didn't come to blows. It came to proverbial, YouTube and podcast blows. But we're gonna get into it all. You can hear
Verbal
us disagree
jousting.
on some stuff. Yeah, but we're gonna get into it all. But first, the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo.
All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I am at Adam Armbrecht, also painfully covering the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy Andy Mack. And over there is at Doug Norrie, blue check mark, owner-operator DFSR for all your daily fantasy projections from FanDuel, DraftKings. If you have daily fantasy needs, specifically related to sports, Doug has you covered. Sir, how are we on Mailbag Friday?
Oh, it's really good. My earbud just fell out and I had a massive freak out. If you saw it online, if you saw it over on YouTube, make sure you subscribe over to the YouTube channel and you can see what happens when the old Bluetooth headphone falls out right when you're asking a question and then all the videos start playing at once. Yeah, good, man. Friday, coming off the loss to the Rockets. Trying not to, join some of the rest of Nets Nation and freaking out about that because I think we kind of had a level-headed approach to what the game was, even though it was disappointing. I think you can allow for both, but head into the weekend and get some more W's, baby. We got to get to that 56.5. The number we only care about, 56.5 wins. We need to get to 57 so I can clear that bet. The rest of the season, it's 57 and then championship. That's how we're looking at the hierarchy of Nets goals here this season.
Very specific order. We're going to get into a handful. So we threw it out there, asked questions of what the fans want to talk about. We have it from coaching to personnel and things that the Nets need to do here. We're going to dive in on all of it. But I will say, because I'm nothing if not aware of myself, I think coming out of yesterday's episode, I very much have swung around. I acknowledged it in episode. Any level of analysis that I was putting on to James Harden, I completely take back out of that game. I agree with you on the idea of what other version of that game and of James Harden were you anticipating. So for whatever it's worth, Doug, you were right, and I know that that's something that's important to you. I know that.
Well, I think this is going to be germane to this. We'll go through the first question because I actually think that these two ideas are they go together here.
I don't just like it. I love it right off the top. So this really came. I left it out there open-ended as to what is your biggest concern around the Brooklyn Nets right now, and more than a handful of fans came back with Steve Nash as being the problem. So we pose it as: is Steve Nash the right coach for the Nets?
Yeah, so the easiest thing I think for people to do when they're frustrated with the team is to blame the coach, because I think it's the hardest thing for fans to probably evaluate what's happening with coaching, and then so because they can't really evaluate it correctly, they then will just use it to be the litmus for whether or not the things are working or not. So like you win games, so like when you win games, you really don't get extra points coaching. It's just like, oh, that's what you're supposed to do. But when you lose them, you get blamed because like who else's fault could it be? So I think with Nash, well, I'm interested to hear like your opinion on this because I have a pretty simple answer for this. The reason Nash is for right now the correct coach actually has nothing to do with X's and O's and only has to do with Kevin Durant. And like I hate to say it this way, but the league is now superstar driven, rightfully so. Superstars are what win championships. We've seen it, just that's the only way it plays out. And if like that's actually your first concern is like you have the best player in the league in Kevin Durant. Who does Kevin Durant want to be the coach? you want to say the superstars run the teams and he's like de facto GM because you need to keep him happy. I probably wouldn't go that far, but I think any other question you have or concern you have about Nash should actually just only be framed in what Kevin Durant wants. because
Yeah.
and I think it's just that easy. We can get into a little bit of coaching around him, like what specific decisions he's made, but at a high level, that's actually the only thing that matters when it comes to Nash. And I think it's pretty clear that these guys want him to be the superstars want him to be the coach. And like therein lies the answer, right? Like that's
by the way, if Kenny Atkinson was still the coach of this team right now, he'd be the right coach for the Brooklyn Nets, to your point, because it means the superstar signed off on it, right?
And he's a great example of what I mean, because those guys didn't want Kenny Atkinson to be the coach, and you're not choosing Kenny Atkinson over Kevin Durant. And so at that point, if he's not their first choice, then that's kind of the end of the story. So I think from that standpoint, and we can talk about Nash like as a specific coach, but I think really any complaints you have about Nash, you need to back out of the X's and O's for a minute and think macro wise around the team and Durant and the superstars. And that's that is way overweight. That's if you look at the pie of what's important, like that is a bigger size of the pie than probably most people want to probably admit.
Yeah, and now inside of the coaching piece of it, you can speak a little bit more to the X's and O's in a second, but I think that if you, again, pull back to the start of the season, if you came into this year as a fan and you liked what Steve Nash did last year and you felt good about him as the head coach, even regardless of the approval of the superstars, coming into this year, we know you don't have Kyrie Irving. You know that you've been dealing with a Joe Harris injury. You know that you didn't have Nicholas Claxton for 17 games. You know that Blake Griffin has turned out not to be the same version of himself last year. You know that Paul Millsap has taken a long time to get himself up to speed on this roster as well. And you have a handful of rookies, and specifically one in Cam Thomas, that you are trying to bring along. From that standpoint alone, that's a lot of things to be adjusting to over the first 20, 30 games of a season. And even from that standpoint, we've talked about it over the course of the year. There's been some curiosities, including, by the way, Nick Claxton starting at the beginning of the year. We were maybe a little surprised that was the direction that they wanted to go. You can critique some of that stuff. But the overarching theme of the season to me has been, adjustments out of necessity and ones that don't necessarily have easy answers. And I think it's easy for fans to get frustrated by that. But this ties back into that last game, right? When I said, would you have done something differently with the rotations of the starting lineup? Your right response was, well, look down the bench. Where were you going? Where were you going to improve the circumstances? And we're going to get into a piece of that in a minute. But I mean, that's where I land on Steve Nash. I think I checked the box because the superstars want him there. Kevin Durant wants him there. And the secondary piece is very much an incomplete wait and see. It's all going to be results oriented. And what does this team do when it comes to the playoffs? That's when you grade Steve Nash. If he has glaring mistakes, then it's a problem. But if he toes the line and the Nets are having success, then he's the right coach.
And I think that, like, look, coaching is as staff driven as anything else. Like, obviously the buck stops with Steve Nash. Like, you need to assemble a staff that can help you just with in-game decisions. And usually the staff is sectioned into between offensive coaching and defensive coaching. And there's guys that handle both sides of it. There's coaches that handle specific sections of players, like that when it comes to development and when it comes to working one-on-one with players, like those relationships are different. So I think coaching is more than just, what is Steve Nash doing with 4 minutes left to go in the second half? Like there's lots more that happens here. I think his in-game stuff has gotten a little bit better this season, frankly, like more time. The timeouts are a little more timely. The ATO stuff is like, looks a lot better. He's for the most part not stuck with things that aren't working for longer than necessary outside of probably the Blake starting thing. Like
that's been a big adjustment for him from last year to this year. I think he's been quicker to try something different, right?
And if he's not named Blake Griffin, I think that actually even that change comes quicker, right? Like I think you're managing egos as much as anything else. And not to say Blake Griffin has an ego. I don't think he does, but I think he has an ego in the sense of like professional athletes have egos, especially ones that have been around for as long as he has. So I think that he's made some uncomfortable decisions that have mostly worked also. So it's hard to really fault Nash here, even on a micro level outside of like, maybe some strict X's and O's things around some defensive schemes, around some personnel stuff that has sometimes not made sense. But I will say for the most part, like my notes around the question mark, what is going on here with this rotation have not been as many this year. So I think that It's hard for me to see. Let me put it this way. I'm going to sum it up. I don't think Nash is a problem. I think that Nash
Right.
is fine. And I just don't think that that's something that Nets fans should really concern themselves with.
We're going to get into now that piece of the roster, what's available to them, and some things not because of injury, and how the Nets may be able to improve that. But first, Doug, holiday season just around the corner. I'm reaching in my pockets looking for some extra cash. Is there any way that I could find some more, maybe eliminating some things I don't realize I've been paying for?
Well, buddy, you got to figure out all the free trials that you accidentally signed up for and are still paying with. And it could be a problem because these companies they set out to get you in there on the free trial. It seems that the promise of free things that only becomes the recurring subscription, the dreaded recurring subscription. Get through with it with Truebill. Truebill is going to solve your problems here for you. It's a new app. It helps you identify and stop paying for the subscriptions you don't need, want, or even forgot about, like me with satellite radio all those years. I still remember satellite radio. It got me for years, baby. Truebill would have solved that at the time. On average, people save up to $720 a year with Truebill. That's the average. You might even be able to save more because companies, they make subscriptions hard to cancel. Truebill just makes it really simple. You link your accounts. Truebill does all the work for you. They cancel your unwanted subscription just one tap. Truebill, they have a concierge too that's going to get you in there to cancel those subscriptions so you don't have to, even if it just means doing the work for you. Don't fall for subscription scams. Start canceling today at truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. Go right now, truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. It can save you thousands a year. Truebill.com/LockedOnNBA.
The hand strikes and gives another answer to the fans' questions as we continue our Mailbag Friday. Will the Nets need to add more shooters to this roster? Because obviously the injury to Joe Harris, it forced Patty Mills into a starting role. And then I think also really opened up the examination of this roster behind Kevin Durant and James Harden to say, do they have enough guys that can hoist with success from the perimeter to help keep defenses honest?
Can we go back and add more for last game? Because I would like to, if we could retroactively add a shooter, I would like
if
to
we
go back
add
to
a
Houston.
player later in the year, do we put his stats into some of these games and say, oh, there's actually a lot more wins back there we didn't realize?
I would like to do that early on. Oh, by the way, just this is a side note about this. Early on in the early days of fantasy football, but long before like computers did it all for you, I once tried to sell my league on I should be the backups stats should count for my guy when they got hurt. Like in the this is before you had like the internet jury. The internet. I remember arguing my roommates in college about this, and I didn't really believe it myself, but I really put in a hero effort to make it work. So anyway, yeah, if we could do that same kind of retroactive thing, that wouldn't be bad. No, look, the shooting's been terrible. Like Joe Harris, people wanted to complain about Joe Harris and what he didn't give you in the playoffs, and what people think is inconsistency, but that's also because they have the microscope on him, because I think a lot of Net fans want him to miss at times because it confirms whatever their bias is about him. And I think there is if you are out there rooting for Joe Harris to miss, think to yourself, if you're rooting for Joe Harris to miss, I know you're out there. I've spoken with these people. He's not a streaky shooter. He's actually about as consistent a 3-point shooter as ever been created in the NBA. And the stats pretty simple. Before the Joe Harris injury, the Nets ranked first.
BJH, as we're referring to it on the podcast.
Then this is the simplest stat. Before he got hurt, which was on November 14th, which is the game he got hurt. Before that game, the Nets ranked first overall in 3-point percentage, and they were around league average in terms of attempts. Okay, so good, great execution, and they just didn't need to take as many because they were making them at a really high clip, right? Like they don't have to have crazy volume if they're just going in more than everyone else. That's a simple way to put it. Since the injury has happened, so the last X amount of games, the Nets rank second to last in 3-point shooting percentage at 31%, and second to last in attempts per game. Here are the other. And I'm going to get I want to hear your opinion about this. Here are the other teams in that group of not enough attempts and bad percentage. Pacers are about to blow it up in tank because they stink. OKC, worst team in the league. Sacramento just fired their coach. Have actually gone on a little winning streak, but okay. Orlando headed back for the lottery again. Washington might be headed for the lottery. Detroit stinks. And then you finally get up to the Lakers, who have been weird this year. That's the list. That's the group that shoots not enough threes and shoots poorly from three. So if you don't think you need Joe Harris, I don't really know another way to put it. You just need him back. And it's pretty simple.
I've often said that if you're a championship caliber team, you at least want to have a couple categories where you keep the company of some of the worst teams in the league. Great to have balance when when you're building up towards a championship run.
Do you
No,
want to
listen,
be? Do you want to be associated in any stat with the group that I just mentioned? Like,
right.
you know what I mean? There's not unless the stat's something like cool halftime performances. Like, I don't know. I don't know what
Which, by
another
the
way to
way,
put it.
OKC, the
It's not.
pageantry of it
And
all.
well, this is where Kevin Durant is such a bailout. Like to have Kevin Durant, the only reason you can sustain these stats and still be in first and still have a good team is because you have Kevin Durant on your team. Like that's really, it's just that simple. Like he is such an absolute bailout at all the times they need him to because he's the best player in the league and can create shots at every level of the court. This is the only reason. Like, and you cannot shoot this poorly and be a good team. It's over the long term. It's in the modern NBA. It's totally impossible.
Okay, so a couple of quick things about it. One, obviously, and by the way, you're taxing Kevin Durant more during the regular season than you wanted to be doing at this stage, which is exactly the opposite of where the Nets want it to be. Very quickly, I want to stay inside the roster and then ask the question of do the Nets need to go out beyond the roster to add another shooter at some point before, let's say, the deadline, obviously. Do the Nets, you think, right now in this moment, regret not doing what was necessary, maybe to retain Jeff Green? Because that is a player that does at least fit that bill, right? He does a little bit of everything. I'm not overvaluing Jeff Green, but you do have a lot of guys that don't do this thing, and he's one more body that does. The Joe Harris injury, amplifies this issue. But if you only have Joe Harris, Patty Mills, essentially, as the two players you can rely on in this category, that's not enough, even if everybody is healthy.
Well, no, I disagree with that because I think it was enough. Like when we saw the stats from earlier in the year when they were first place in 3-point shooting, I think
let me reframe it. It's not enough if you feel like you should be safeguarding for a potential injury at some point to either one of these players, unless you came in with the attitude of they'll be 100% healthy and everything will be fantastic. But it only takes one, right?
I think it's okay. So if I'm going to look honestly at the situation, I think if you went through every team and knocked off their, two best 3-point shooters in Kyrie and Joe Harris two of their best 3-point shooters, like, most teams would run into this problem down the back end of their roster, right? Like it'd be really hard to go through I'm not going to do this exercise right now, but if you went through every team, knocked off 2 or 3 of their best players, you're not just finding sharp shooting 3-point guys at the bottom end of a roster. Like they just don't exist. If you're like a great shooter, like you actually play above your weight, you probably play more minutes than you should, a la Joe Harris, a la Duncan Robinson, who probably play more minutes based on what their deficiencies are elsewhere because you're so good at this one thing. This is like that. I think that's where these guys just are a little bit rare. So I don't think it's a failing in roster construction. It's just rearing its ugly head now when it kind of goes wrong.
That's fair. I also think it's maybe how dependent are you on this supporting piece to your roster, right? So for argument's sake, if James Harden was a higher 3-point percentage player, he takes a lot of them, then that would also cover up a little bit of losing Joe Harris for this stretch. I'm gonna do it, friends. The answer might be there for you. The only guy when I look across the roster, Doug's gonna love it. We haven't seen him yet with any substantial amount of time. Kessler Edwards, a 40% 3-point shooter in college. I'm saying it only for the simple fact that he was regarded as a guy that would be among a more NBA ready type player. I know he has the weird shot, so that obviously is probably something that they're working on in the background. But again, in the old, you might as well, if you don't use it, you lose it. You may as well use some minutes with a player like Kessler Edwards to say, can you knock down some of his perimeter shots? We liked what we saw from Duke Johnson. He's not a perimeter shooter. We love Cam Thomas. He is not known as a perimeter shooter either. So, is there a world where you can go to one of two ways? Test the waters of a little bit of Kessler Edwards if you want to, or say the Nets are going to need to add something here, knowing that you're still at least 5 to 7 weeks away from knowing what the true timeline is on Joe Harris.
Duke Johnson, the ex-running back for the Texans. Is that who we're looking for? That's
man, and I did this early on when Duke Jr. was brought in, because I don't start with his first name. It always runs me far afield. David Duke Jr., the young NBA player. Duke Johnson, career dwindling, and I don't think he has a 3-point shot, by the way, either.
He might be on the ball, probably. I think we knew early on that the NBA season's long. It makes sense. Like, you should always take your lumps early. Like, I think there's probably some machinations around how much you can move two-way guys back and forth. Like, and so there's probably not wanting to do it when you don't have to, especially if you don't think they're going to, like, really see the bench, really see the court, is going to make sense. No idea development wise, like, where he is. In terms of why not, if you can and it's not going to cost you anything, I'm always a fan of that. I think the best teams typically do this, and right down to like the lowest levels of every sport. Like, play guys above their head early when it doesn't matter as much, because it's going to pay off later. And I think that most good organizations sort of understand this at a level to say, hey, you might not be ready now, but at some point we're just going to have to use you. So doing that early makes sense. I get why the Nets are trying to serve a couple different things here, where they have veterans that they need to also play. So it really can't come in the form of like not playing a James Johnson or not playing a Paul Millsap, but because you're managing other things as well. And so I'm for it, and I can see why it hasn't happened.
I got to swing for it, friends. If we're gonna count players that are injured or not on the roster, why don't we just add Spencer Dinwiddie's stat line into the Brooklyn Nets this year? That could effectively solve a little bit of the problems they're having. If Kessler Edwards does get that chance, though, Doug, he's probably going to get himself a couple of Built Bars.
Oh, baby, it's the holiday season. You're packing on the calories. It can really be easy to turn to those desserts. I have as much problem with this as anybody, so I get you. That's why you got to turn to Built Bar. They started with the flavors, so they're going to match some of your favorite desserts, except for, you're going to get the stats that back it up from the health part. You're going to lower those calories, lower the sugar, lower the net carbs, all across the board, raise the protein levels. Oh, the flavors: double chocolate, cookies and cream, peanut butter brownie, not ice cream flavors. These are actual protein bars that are actually good for you. Taste good too, where they kind of, lap the competition in terms of the taste piece. It's kind of ridiculous, actually. Maybe you want to throw one in there for Santa too. If Santa's coming around, throw a Built Bar in there instead of the cookie. Do Santa, in quotes, a favor. Right now, you go to built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15. You're going to get 15% off your order. Check out all the flavors. Check out the stats. Like I said, the calories low, sugar low, net carbs low, protein high. That's all at built.com. Promo code LOCKED15. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com.
And it's our friends over at betonline.ag, because they want you to know that they've got you covered all season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as football season is winding down and building towards those playoff runs. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the sports action this season. You head over to that new updated desktop or mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use promo code LOCKEDON and you'll get that 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. For basketball, football, NHL, boxing, and UFC, right down to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts. And where we start to finish is with adjustments to the rotations. I teased it. I tantalized the audience with this coming out of the Rockets' loss. I assert to you, Cam Thomas should be in the starting rotation alongside James Harden. Get Patty Mills back into his sixth man, first guy off the bench role, and provide a little bit of relief for James Harden in terms of on-ball creation. It's not Patty Mills' bag. Cam Thomas has proven that he can do that with consistency inside, mid-range, getting at the basket. I know you agree with me.
No, I don't. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that move. I think that, like, with James, I think what we see with
started.
I think James Harden, okay, I'm assuming these cases we're talking about when James Harden is not with Kevin Durant. Like, is that the, or do you mean like Durant, Harden, and Cam Thomas?
I think that they would be better suited to go with the starting lineup: James Harden, Kevin Durant, Cam Thomas, LaMarcus Aldridge, and then you tell me, who you want the last piece to be there, because I think that Cam Thomas will benefit as much from being in the starting rotation as Harden, and everyone will benefit from having him there. If Cam Thomas is in the starting rotation and they're respecting Kevin Durant, they're respecting James Harden, it means Cam Thomas is going to have nothing but open opportunities to be successful. And that means maybe taking a couple of attempts, a little bit of a workload early in games off of those two players so that they can be a little bit more dominant later on in the third and fourth quarter.
Yeah, okay, so I think where I would disagree with that is I would say that when you're sharing the court with Kevin Durant and James Harden, your looks are going to be fewer and farther between. At that point, you'd want like spot up shooting more than anything else, and that's where I think Mills is actually a better candidate for that role. Is
Mhm.
that because Mills is like not as much an on-ball creator and not as much as just sort of a pure scorer. So I think I'd rather and can like just live without the ball in his hands for long periods of time, and I think that I would keep that way. And actually, you mentioned someone else. I actually wonder if they'll go back because now that Claxton's back and started last game, I actually wonder if they'll go back to Aldridge not starting and like
Mm,
doing that 2-man, like because now that Claxton's back and you actually don't need to really add more offense. Like they put Aldridge in there because Blake was such a zero at some
yeah.
point. Like you were getting nothing, nothing, nothing from him. And so but now if you can get the defensive sort of switchability and just sort of presence with Claxton, where you don't need to add a bunch more offense, and he has the requisite size to at least compete on the
Mhm.
interior, which is like that's where they needed to move Aldridge into that spot. I actually wonder if we'll see a return of the Aldridge Mills pairing in the second unit that have been really, really good, and then move Claxton back. So I'm gonna yes but you in the old improv thing, or yes and you. And say I would not do the Thomas move, but I would make a move to maybe bring Claxton into the starting unit, pair him with Harden and Durant, and move Aldridge back into a thing where he can be a little more high usage without you worrying about his shots coming at the expense of those other two guys.
Sure. I think so. My pushback on it will be one, getting LaMarcus Aldridge paired with Mills in the second unit means that Mills needs to be in the second unit in order to have that effective pairing, right?
There,
And I know, by the way, it's very, guys come on and off the court, and then you get those pairings together. The other piece that to me though is going back to, like you said, the start of the season. We talked about it a little bit before of now, Blake Griffin's not effective. What's the best 5-man lineup? Do you trend a little bit smaller? I wonder. So if I'm going along with your theme of putting Nicholas Claxton back in the starting rotation, I don't mind a 5-man rotation of Claxton. You can say Bembry if you like what he's been doing, but you can put Bruce Brown back in there if you wanted to, because then Bembry gives you a little bit more effective offense, a different type of offense in the second unit. But Claxton, Kevin Durant, James Harden, Bruce Brown, and Cam Thomas as your starting 5. Now, the difference being, as we talked about, the double teams getting thrown at Kevin Durant, forcing the ball out of his hands. Same thing for James Harden for stretches. It'll look different what the byproduct of that is. To your point, Patty Mills moving without the ball and then being on the perimeter for shots. But now you would be talking about having Nick Claxton in the 2-man game going at the rim with James Harden. Bruce Brown is effective finding that little floater in the paint. And then Cam Thomas, another guy that can slash, get into the mid-range game and find his shot. It'd be a different looking offense, but I think that it might be more effective. And then you'd be talking about LMA, Patty Mills, Bembry, etc. in that second unit. So these are the kind of things that I'm not going to tell you I have 100% conviction about it, but I would not hate seeing Steve Nash, going back to the top of it, try it. See if you can find something here. And with specifically with Cam Thomas, I think now is the time to see how far and how quickly he can grow. Because if all of a sudden he really starts to roll here and finds his rhythm with consistency, then you unlock something completely different. That when Joe Harris comes back, this team does look as dynamic offensively, not as, but very much a dynamic offensive team like we were hoping for coming into the year.
yeah, I think that we started to see it, right? 32 minutes last game. He's
Yeah.
played, let's see, 20 or more in 3 of the last 5 games. The shooting's kind of come and gone. But I think you're seeing at least the comfort level increase on Cam, and that's a good thing. Or
Mhm.
that's exactly what probably we wanted to see early on. I think some people wanted to see him even earlier. This seems right around the same right timeline, I think. And we've seen some of the warts too, right? It's not all great. Like it's when you're a streaky, and I'm going to use streaky shooter in a different way than I was referencing Harris before because they're just kind
Mhm.
of different players, sort of at volume. We've seen what it can look like when it's just kind of not working, and it can look kind of bad, right? So I think from that standpoint, understand not bad, but just I don't know, inconsistent. So
Yep.
I think you can understand why he's not a guy maybe at times you want to be like anchoring an entire team of scorers right now. I think that's pretty clearly the case or not the case. But the part where should he be seeing more minutes and can he add to the team? Obviously, I think they've actually really not needed, but benefited from I say this with David Duke Jr. yesterday when we were talking about his shot. It was like, did the shot look great? No, but at least he looked confident taking it. Sometimes in the NBA, that counts, at least early, that counts for as much as anything. Is that, are you confident to take the shot even when it's not working? And I think as you progress and get better, that confidence will help you along the way, as opposed to being really like beta-ish or whatever it is, shy about whatever the word is around, taking a shot when you need to and not. And actually sometimes that's worse. And that's why we've seen Kevin Durant specifically at times really lay into Thomas. He missed a rotation the other day where Durant threw the ball out of bounds because he was basically said the Cam was standing in the wrong place. But then other times where he took it right to the rim and really congratulated him for he got the ball and didn't just hot potato it back to Durant. Like, he got the ball and took it to the rim. And
by the way, this is the biggest like big brother, little brother, relationship of like, all you want is for big bro to give you a fist bump and a pat on the back. And then every time you make that little mistake, it's just like,
do you remember that play I'm talking about where he just he got into him? Like, he got in, it was a cross court pass and he was like, he said like, you screwed up. Right. So, and that's good. Like, if you can deal with that and then go back and still continue to operate, that is actually a skill. Like, that is actually a real NBA skill to not let that mentally affect you. And I think that clearly Cam has that. So I think the future is really bright from that perspective. And I just think we're going to keep seeing him, see him more and more. Okay. I think we get out of here. Mailbag complete, I would say, right?
We close that up. We go ahead and we close the mailbag up. We tuck it away, send it in, attack at us. Doug's going to fill you in on the information, but that's how you wrap up a week, I think, friends.
Oh, baby. Okay, so head on over to YouTube. All the episodes are going up there. There's been a million comments over there. Get them in. Adam and I try to respond to all the ones that, that keep it respectful, but we're going to get in there and respond, do a little dialogue back and forth for sure. You got to head on over Locked On Nets YouTube, subscribe to the channel, jump into some comments, say hey, we'll say hey back. But every episode will be up there. The link to Locked On Nets YouTube channel will be in the show notes.
Hey, let's dialogue, friends. Shout out to a frequent flyer, Chance Donahoe. You've just been in YouTube a lot. You're making comments. You're interacting with us. You're being respectful. And you got a passion for the Brooklyn Nets fan base. Thanks for being a part of it. Let's take the sentiment from this, kind of leave the name attached to it. My rookie year was huge for me as far as the learning curve, especially those last 3 games. Timmy Tebow.
Oh, one of the all-time great. I can't with Tebow. One of the all-time great poets. We'll be back. Man, I've never struggled to say all-time poets at the end, but that's when I don't want to do it.
You don't have to. You know what? He doesn't have to be. He can just be a guy that said something.
Just the guy. We'll be back again next week talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.